Thank you very much. Chag Sameach. Welcome everybody. Wanted to study these texts with you. That'll be the first part of our session, and then Joy will say something about some larger issue raises, and we hope to have some time for discussion as well. But a lot to do within this time. So the text that you should all be seeing on your screen is a rabbinic text. It's a Talmudic text. It comes from the Tractate of Shabbat, 31a. I wanted people to be able to see most of the text at the same time, so we could compare there's three incidents that we're going to be looking at, which meant that it was impossible to somehow fit on the screen all the English text and the Hebrew text, Hebrew Aramaic text. So while I'm sure some people would want to see the Hebrew, there wasn't any way to do that, but you could, as I say, that again, the source is Shabbat 31a. So we begin right at the top, as our sages taught. Once a non-Jew approached Shammai and said, "How many Torahs do the Jews have?" So these texts are all about two of the great rabbinic scholars, Shammai, Hillel and Shammai, who were in Oh, we're
okay.
muted?
No, okay, go.
Oh, and I told you all the answers of that muted time. So they're early scholars. They're the easiest way, without going into a lot of details, is they're kind of contemporaries of Jesus. So you know around the period that they lived. And so the story begins how a non-Jew approaches Shammai and says, "How many Torahs do the Jews have?" Shammai responds, "Two, the written Torah and the oral Torah." So a word of explanation here. Usually I'll try and read the whole story and then talk about it. But the written Torah is the Torah scroll from Genesis to Deuteronomy. And the oral Torah is additional explanations of the Torah. For traditional authorities, the oral Torah goes back to Sinai and to Moses, so it's contemporary with the written Torah, that is contemporary in its origin at Sinai at this moment of Shavuot. Liberal scholars think that the oral Torah comes from the period when rabbinic Judaism is being formed, the time of Hillel and Shammai and the centuries that follow. And the word Jews, clearly, even traditional scholars recognize there were some Jews who only believed in the written Torah at that time. So this was a kind of issue, but the historical context isn't really so important here. So Shammai responds, there's two Torahs, it's written and oral Torah. And the non-Jew says, "I believe you about the written Torah, but not about the oral Torah. I just don't believe in its authority. Convert me on the condition that you teach me the written Torah, that is, only the written Torah." Shammai's response Shammai becomes angry and sends the person away with a reprimand. So the same person then approaches the other great scholar, Hillel, who converted him. Hillel then taught him the alphabet, Gimel Dalet, that is the Hebrew alphabet, the first letters. So that's the first day lesson. The next day, the person returns, and Hillel reversed the letters. So he started from the other end of the Hebrew alphabet, from Taf, Shin, etc. The non-Jew said, "Yesterday you taught it to me differently. It was completely different." Hillel said, the response is, "You see that you need to rely upon me to learn the alphabet. Similarly, you need to rely upon me about the truth of the oral Torah, right? So you need to have, rely on your teacher, and that's sort of the end of the incident. Okay, now we have a second incident, which is some of you may have heard or studied before. This is the one that's more often quoted. There's another incident, again, with the non-Jew who approaches Shammai. It says, convert me, again, with a condition, not the same condition as the first. His condition is that you teach me the whole Torah while I am standing on one foot. Needless to say, it's a challenging notion. Shammai chases him away. This time, there's a little bit additional. He chases him away with the builder's measuring rod that was in his hand. You know, it sounds almost, there's a kind of a violent threat here, right? He picks up some kind of stick and chases the guy out. The person then goes to Hillel, who converted him, and Hillel said, whatever is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow human being. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and study. So two things I want to point out here. First of all, both in the first case and the second case, Hillel's immediate response to the person is Hillel converts them, right? Which isn't the contemporary practice, or hasn't been the practice for many centuries. He doesn't say you need to study for a year. He doesn't test the person about how much he may already know about Judaism. He immediately says, I'll convert you, and converts him. And then he goes to the second part. In the first incident, he starts teaching him the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. And the second, he says, in response to the standing on one foot, okay, I can teach you the whole Torah in standing on one foot. Here's the whole Torah. Whatever is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow human being. This is the whole Torah. This is Kol HaTorah is the Hebrew. The rest is commentary. Go and study. The other thing I want to point out is that this notion that study is critical to Judaism is very much a piece of the rabbinic Judaism that is being created or is being passed down by Hillel and Shammai. It's not so clear from the biblical text that people were studying Torah. We just don't know. Traditional commentators would say that they were studying Torah. Abraham was studying, Moses was studying, etc. But it's only in the time of Hillel and Shammai that we begin to have texts about people studying. So let's look at the third incident and then see where we stand. So there's another incident with, you can guess already, a non-Jew, but here it's a little bit different. One of the things that's striking about the first two incidents is we don't know anything about why the non-Jew wants to convert. What brought them to this moment? What's in their mind, other than what we might divine or understand from the question, the condition they ask. But we don't know. We don't know what's going on. Here, there is something of a backstory. So the non-Jew happened to be passing by the house of study, again, a piece of rabbinic Judaism and practice. And he hears the voice of the teacher saying, quoting a biblical text from Exodus, these are the garments which they shall make for the high priest, a breastplate and an ephod. So the high priest had a whole series of garments, special garments, elaborate garments that were made for, that he would wear in the service, in the temple service. So the non-Jew asks the students that are here in this house of study, who are these garments for? And the students reply, they're for the Kohen Gadol, they're for the high priest. So the non-Jew said to himself, I will go and convert so that they will appoint me a high priest. Now, you may have already guessed that it's, if you know anything about the Kuna, the priesthood in the Bible, in the Torah, it's hereditary. All the priests are descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, who's the first priest. So the truth is, there's no way that this person could become a priest, never mind the high priest. But he approaches Shammai, says to him, convert me on condition that you'll have me appointed high priest. Shammai does exactly as what he did in the previous incident. He picks up the builder's measuring rod and basically chases him away. The non-Jew now approaches Hillel, who converted him. Again, Hillel acts to convert right away. And then he says, we can only appoint a person king who knows the rituals of kingship. Go and study the rituals of kingship. And it's really, I must admit, it's not totally clear to me why they use the terms of kingship rather than priesthood, but it's really, as we'll see in the next paragraph, it turns out the same thing. So he tells the person, he gives them, at each time he speaks, Hillel's responses to the people coming to him, he gives a different response. It's not the same response. So here he tells the person, look, if you want to, really what he's saying is, if you want to be the high priest, you better learn what's involved in being the high priest. You better know what you have to know. So the non-Jew went and studied scripture, and he came to a verse in Numbers, in Bamidbar, and the layperson who comes near to the holy sanctuary shall be put to death. Right? So there is this notion about the sanctity of the Mishkan, or later of the temple, that only the priests and the Levites could enter parts of the temple, and that sort of ordinary Jew, regular Jew, it isn't allowed to approach too closely to the space that is sanctified. And in fact, the penalty for entering this inappropriately is a capital punishment. It's death. So the non-Jew asks, and it turns out the person he's studying with is Hillel. He's asked, to whom does this verse apply? Hillel answers, it applies, the implication of this is it applies to all Jews who are not a priest or a Levite, even to David, the king of Israel. That is the most important, person, perhaps, but whether it's the king of Israel, the greatest Talmudic scholar, the most pious person, if they're not a priest or Levite, they're not allowed to enter into the temple. And then the non-Jew, hearing this, applied an a fortiori, which is a Talmudic argument, which says, I'll just use an example, if you like 1 spoon of chocolate ice cream, you certainly were going to like 5 spoons of chocolate ice cream, all the more so. If this is true, all the more so. So it's a kind of logical inference. If this is true, then that is just all the more so true, right? So if even the king of Israel, in a sense, the most important Jew or Israelite, even if this rule applies to him, then kal v'chomer, it applies to me, a convert, right? Because he goes on to say, if the Israelites, that is, Israelites who aren't Levites or priests, were called the children of God, and out of the love that God has for them, God calls them Israel, my firstborn son. Again, quoting a biblical verse, this time from Exodus. So there's a verse that God refers to the people of Israel as though they are God's, not just child, but firstborn, often the favorite, the special child. Yet it's still written that that person who comes near to the temple shall be put to death. Then a convert who comes only with his staff and bag, all the more so does this rule apply. I assume the implication there is they don't have any standing that would put them higher than the people who are Jews or Israelites. So it is a kind of interesting. It's a little convoluted, but I hope it's clear. So right, so the what's interesting, as we'll see, so the convert comes to realize that it's inappropriate or it's not possible for him to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And so he does an interesting thing. The non-Jew goes back to Shammai and said, could I ever have been fit to be a high priest? Doesn't scripture say, and the lay person who comes near shall be put to death. So it's, you could read that the convert's statement in two ways. It could be a rebuke of Shammai. So why didn't you say to me, why didn't you tell me why I couldn't be the high priest? Why did you just, send me away, chase me away even, without an explanation? Or it could be that he is coming to teach Torah to Shammai and say, let me teach you Torah. And here's what Torah says, that a layperson can't be a high priest. And I'm going to quote a biblical verse as proof. I didn't make this up. This is what rabbis do. They look in the text, they look in the biblical text in particular to say, this is how we derive law. And then, as has been the pattern, we don't know Shammai's response, right? The text leaves that unspoken. So he, then this non-Jew who actually is Jewish by now because he's been converted, he approached Hillel and said, humble Hillel, let blessings rest upon your head, for you brought me under the wings of the Shekhinah, divine presence. I'm just waiting. I don't know if you can all hear the siren going by, unfortunately. So there's an epilogue to this text, but I want to really talk about that before we. I want to talk about the text more before we get there. So the first thing I want to ask to think about is to think about Shammai. There's clearly, I would say, that his what must be called anger at the people coming and this kind of just outright rejection without any explanation, and even being threatening to the people, or maybe it's impatience. You can interpret it in a variety of ways, but it's hard to defend that. But I want to take a moment and say, but what could we understand about Shammai's response that might make it just less, he's the bad cop in the story and Hillel is the good cop. And if you think about it, what the people coming and asking are unreasonable requests, if you think about it, right? One person's coming and saying, look, I only want half of what you have to teach. Or I only have enough time to spend on learning this thing that you obviously treasure and feel important, that that I could stand on one foot. And the last one, I think, is even the most challenging because it feels the most absurd, right? Look, it's like I'm applying for a job in this company, but it's a kind of low-level job, but I think I should be the CEO. I think I should start there based on nothing, right? And you almost have a sense like, oh, those clothes sound really cool. That, I want to be the high priest so I can wear the clothes or have that status. In that sense, that person seems the most difficult, the least serious. And so in some ways, I think Shammai is holding to a principle that he holds in other arguments with Hillel, which is that for Shammai, the ultimate principle that I think his Judaism and his understanding of rabbinic Judaism rests on is truth. That you tell the truth, and that lying is never a good thing. And so his response to these people is the truth. You can't do that. That's just ridiculous. He could have said it in a nicer way, and I don't think there's any way to defend that. But I think Shammai is being truthful. So then you have the opposite question, right? What is Hillel doing, right? He knows you can't study the whole Torah on one foot. He knows you can't be the high priest. So isn't in that sense supporting what Shammai would say? Like there's a kind of corruption in engaging in a lie, even if it's for a good motive, right? He wants to make these people Hillel wants to make them feel welcome. Shammai clearly has no interest in that once he hears what they say. But there is something phony, you could argue, about Hillel, or he's trying to just, it's kind of like a sort of evangelical in the worst sense of it. Like he's trying to, oh yeah, this religion's really easy. Just come in, and later you'll find out that actually it's not so simple. So I think then the question is really I want to ask about Hillel, and let me suggest an answer, and then we'll open it up for some questions, and also begin to move to the next part, which I think what is happening with Hillel is he understands the requirements are ridiculous, but he understands that what they come from is a place of anxiety by these people. They're coming, the requirements aren't really what's at issue here. They're worried that, Judaism is so vast. Are they ever going to be able to, coming late to it, are they ever going to be able to learn enough to really feel accepted and feel that they're Jewish? Or there is a sense that Judaism isn't just a faith, but it's also a people. And so am I ever going to be accepted? And so Hillel understands, even though I'm not saying those are their questions, but he understands the anxiety that underlies what's going on. And so what he does, he doesn't respond to the questions, the requirements. He responds to the people. And that's why it's really important that what he does first is to convert them. And so, sorry, just got distracted. So what's important is that he converts them, which is an affirmation of them. He doesn't affirm the question, he affirms the person. And most strikingly, by converting them, he makes it clear that there's no test here. There's no like, you could be rejected at the end of some process, or maybe we'll discover that you're not good enough or you're not serious enough. He takes all that out of the equation by right off the beginning says convert, and now you begin the process of study and that's why in the end the third case is so powerful, because what happens, we don't actually know in the second case whether after he tells the person who wants it on 1 foot, here's the one rule, go and study, whether that person studied or not from this part of the story. But we see for the third case that this person really joins the rabbinic enterprise. He goes and studies Torah, and then he goes and teaches Torah, and he teaches his teacher by what he says to Shammai.
So before we move on, let's just see if there are any questions, comments. Tess, are you going to manage this for us? If there are questions.
No questions yet, but
we're looking at these texts, of course, because the classic text read on Shavuot is the text of the book of Ruth, and the famous story in which Ruth basically converts to Judaism by saying to Naomi a formula, which is, I want to be part of you. And while Naomi has some anxiety just about what Ruth is leaving and what she's going to, she doesn't actually say, you know what, go study Talmud for a couple of years, go back. She doesn't make it hard. She makes it quite easy. And I think, what's striking to me about these texts is how far we've come, and I think not in a good way, with respect to the way in which we embrace people who want to be part of the Jewish people. But before I get to that, as I was looking at these texts this morning in light of the world we are living in right now and running an institution, I am very struck by this leadership question of both Shammai and Hillel. And the fact that neither one of these rabbis saw these questions coming at them. And most of the time we don't, right? None of us saw this coming, what we're living through right now. And I think what happens is that you have, on the one hand, a Shammai who contracts, who's trying to hold the tradition close, who is threatened by this anxiety, and as Michael said, and also by this unexpected, unanticipated threat to his understanding of tradition. But I think what we see with Hillel is what leadership is about, particularly right now, which is how do I remain porous to the experience of the other? How do I not put up all those defenses? How do I not see the tradition as threatened, but actually as an opportunity to meet that person directly and share that experience? So I'd never actually seen these texts in that regard, and my desire is actually really to talk about conversion, but I wanted to share that because I think whether you are running an institution or in a relationship or in a job situation, particularly now, I think the challenge is to be like Hillel, to experience that unexpected dart even coming at you as an opportunity for engagement. So let's go back to this question of whether what we're supposed to do when somebody says, I'd like to join the Jewish people, is in the classic contemporary rabbinic style, send them away 3 times. We either say, why do you want to do that? You don't really want to do that. Why do you want to do that? This doesn't make any sense. Your reasons aren't good enough. You don't know enough. Come back when you've learned a lot. And I think my colleague, Elliot Cosgrove, who's in another room right now, I think once famously said, you know, when you try to join a gym, and I run a gym, so I know this, right? We don't say to people, you know what, go home, lose 50 pounds and come back, and then we'll let you join the gym, right? We say, how can we help you? And what's interesting is that we understand that, you know, there have been many events in history, clearly, that lead us to wonder, or have led rabbis to wonder why people would want to become Jewish. We clearly are not living in that time right now. Any of my colleagues on this Zoom, and certainly when I was a rabbi of a congregation, can attest to the fact that we have something powerful to offer the world, and we're proud of it. And why wouldn't we want everybody to be part of it? And so my radical suggestion to you is, why don't we just do what Hillel did? Why don't we just say yes? Why do we send people away? Why don't we even require that they study? Now, this really gets a lot of my rabbinic colleagues annoyed, because the answer to that question is, well, if you have the opportunity to get people to study, why wouldn't you require it? And what I learned from these texts is that actually, Hillel converts them first, and then they all continue to study. Because of course, if you're met, as Michael said, with love, if you're met with respect, if you're met with embrace, then why wouldn't you want to keep doing it? Why wouldn't you yourself sense that there's so much riches here? Why can't I learn more? So, you know, my radical proposal is that we, as wonderful as basic Judaism classes are, and the JCC offers a terrific one, and even as wonderful as conversion classes are, and I would certainly encourage everybody to do them, I wouldn't require it. If somebody came to me and said, I want to be Jewish, I'd say, sure, let's go to the mikveh. The rest is commentary. And I am actually confused about why it is that others don't take this position. Why, given how rich our tradition is, we wouldn't want as many people as possible, certainly those people who want to do it, to join us. And I would ask finally, and then I see some questions, so I'll stop. What are the risks if we make a mistake? What happens if somebody has not spent 2 years studying and finds out after they've converted, yeah, this really isn't for me? What have we done damage to Jewish tradition if we embrace that person and they decide, you know, quite frankly, to be like a lot of Jews, which is like not quite in it? I'm not sure that that we've accomplished our goal here. So with that, I guess there are some questions, so we're happy to take them.
John, I'm gonna unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, we can hear you.
Hi, John.
So I didn't have as much a question as just I was thinking about what you said. I agree with it, but also I think it's a little bit conflicting because like the analogy you gave about the gym membership and being accepted, I think
I don't
right.
think Judaism and gyms are exactly the same.
Right. I think even as far as the analogy goes and accepting people, I mean, that's definitely a business, and why would I expect someone at a gym to accept me is because it's money in their pockets. But maybe more along the lines of being accepted on like a varsity sports team and having to earn it. And of course, it's a lot of pressure to put on someone to say you have to earn this new identity, and why would we do that to someone? But why do we do that in any case? I feel like it's because there's value in what you're learning and what you're being shaped into, that we are accepting you and we're bringing you into this community together.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that there's value. I guess I'm just not sure who determines that. I would argue that the person who wants to join, if that person is sincere in his heart and he knows it or she knows it, why is that up to me and not up to him or her?
And I agree with you, and I think we need maybe some common ground between those 2 points. But you mentioned whether it would hurt the existing culture, and
yeah,
I feel like it might. I mean, I want to give people the benefit of doubt and trust their intentions, but I don't know. I feel like there are enough people who can casually commit to something that aren't as serious as religious identity, and they're not fully committed, and it draws a lot of questions about how you interact with them, how you include them. Maybe you want to be inclusive and you just don't know how to include them because they just haven't committed the amount that you would expect them to commit. And again, defining that and measuring that is, there's no good measurement, but
yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, right? Because we associate commitment with study.
Right.
And, what's fascinating to me is that, my grandparents who were born in Ukraine knew absolutely nothing. I mean, they were not learned Jews.
Mm-hmm.
They were very committed, obviously. Now, they were born into it, and I don't mean to suggest this analogy is perfect, but I would at least raise the question of whether learning is what commits you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're onto something when you ask that question. What is it that makes you committed to something?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to redefine that and get better answers. Yeah, thanks.
Other questions?
Shirley, I'm going to unmute you.
Shirley, are you there? Is this Shirley Loeb you're unmuting?
Yeah.
She's still muted.
Yeah, I don't know why it's okay. There we go.
Hello? You got us?
Hi, Shirley.
Okay. Here we are. Yeah. Hi, Joy.
How are you?
Great. Fred's going to ask the question.
Oh, hi, Fred.
Hi. Congratulations. By the way, this is great. So in the time of Hillel, in the time of Shammai, there were people who
Wait, Fred, you got
Yes?
to turn one device off because you're echoing.
Okay.
Got it? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So in those times, there were non-Jews, there were Jews, there were converts, but there were also people who bridged the area. They were Judaizers. They were sympathizing. And one of the stumbling blocks to people who decided to be a Jew or someone who was just a Judaizer was the fact that they had to be circumcised to be Jewish. At least some people thought so. Some people thought so. And my question is, did Hillel think so? Do you know if Hillel, because there's no mention of it, he does convert them. I don't know.
That's my
It's an interesting, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, the text is very challenging to traditional Jewish practice, even things that are talked about elsewhere in the Talmud, right? There's nothing about circumcision, there's nothing about a mikvah, so, and as you probably know, it isn't as though the Talmud speaks in one voice. So there are lots of contradictory things in the Talmud. So it's not clear from whether when it says he converted them that maybe that involved in circumcision. It just, what is clear from the text is the conversion is immediate, whether it's including, going, immersing and a circumcision or not. And the studying really comes later. And that, that's here in this text. It's not found in most other traditional texts. Yeah, so, and one other thing, because it was a period of time when there were lots of different varieties of Judaism. And you could say that, in the Middle Ages, there were a lot fewer varieties, perhaps. But now I think one of the challenges we face on these issues about conversions and standards, et cetera, is there's much more spectrum. There are, people who are in relationships with non-Jews. There are some couples like that who are raising their children in two religious traditions. So the picture has become more complex, and that should be acknowledged. And last thing I'll say is that, it's clearly, Hillel here is presented as being very open, and I think, and I think that's the larger picture of him, someone who's patient and open, and that doesn't mean that he's naive and unrealistic, right? So, it could be that he knows that sometimes this story, it was all success, and other times it could be, it wasn't a success. As Joyce said, people thought they wanted to become Jewish and then they wandered away from it, and that's also true. It isn't only, happy ending stories like everything else in life.
I'm gonna.
You got to turn off all your devices except one, Fred, if you want to keep going. But was there another question before?
We have a few other questions, so I'm going to move on to the next person. Paul, I'm going to unmute you.
I'm unmuting myself. So a couple of questions I have, and I'm trying to be brief. Like Hillel's community had the capacity to absorb these converts. What about communities? I'm Dutch and American, and I think I'm also actually a convert. And I know, like, the Jewish community in Amsterdam after the war simply did not have the capacity to absorb converts. So I just thinking about that at different times in history, does the Jewish community have the capacity to absorb converts or not?
You mean psychologically?
Sometimes physically, because of persecution, or because the community doesn't have, like, there's too few members to take that on, etc.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and I think it is actually the point, which is that where we have until quite recently really been a community that was defined by who's in and who's out, by lots and lots of kinds of boundaries. And I am struck by the fact that, I was so upset that we weren't going to be able to have this Tikkun in the building, because we are so devoted to it. And I sit at that door and I click off the, 3,200 people that attend. But it's very bounded, right? We're limited by the boxes, and people are fighting to get into some rooms, and speakers aren't so happy because they get too small a room. And, there's a lot of that going on. Now, I want to report that there are 3,000 unique visitors tonight. and there are a lot of people sitting in rooms with more than one person here. And we're reaching people I know from California. Ari, I don't know if you're still here, but, and in the wee hours of the morning, we're going to be reaching people from Israel. So and Europe. So I am very interested in this question of what happens when we don't have boundaries. And it's scary, right? It's easy to say, I know you, I know who you are, I know who your mother was, I can trust you. It's much riskier in that sense to say, you know, come on in. But I guess I come from a place of enormous confidence of this tradition. I really believe in its resiliency and its capacity to absorb.
Yeah,
You have the last.
yeah, I just want to make kind of, I think we're about towards the end of our time, so I just want to say two quick things about the text. I think, as I said, I think it's really about larger things than
I want to show the epilogues. I'll share it.
it's about not just about conversion. It's not just about Hillel and Shammai, but I think it's about two other things as well. It's really a lot about teachers and students. I think one of the things that's so powerful about Hillel's response is that he responds to each student differently. And you can just imagine that he understands that, and as Joyce suggested, some people may be, you know, studying is their forte, and other people, they really want to find their way into Judaism through spiritual experiences, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's also, I'm saying it's a text that models different learning styles, and that a good teacher responds to each individual as an individual rather than with prepackaged, you know, here's what, or you know, this is how we teach it to everybody the same. As I just point out the epilogue here, which comes, I didn't want you to read it because it sort of gives away what the point of view of the story is. So sometime later, the three converts happened to be in the same place. They said, the severity of Shammai sought to drive us from the world. The humbleness of Hillel brought us under the wings of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. So not only does it kind of validate Hillel, but I think ultimately I want to read the story in its largest context, which I think Joy was sort of hinting at, that it's really about life. And it's really about how do you respond to the things that come your way. Often they're unexpected, sometimes they may be challenging, sometimes they're not so challenging. But the question is, we all, in our lives, the next moment is unknown. Tomorrow is unknown. So how do we respond? You know, I think Shammai is clutching, to use Joy's expression, and Hillel is open-hearted love. And I think he understands that that basically the humbleness of the text that it talks about there, I think is that he understands that you never know how the story is going to turn out. You just never know. And so entering into the experience, into each encounter with that as your kavanah, that is your overall spiritual intention, I think is the most, the deepest thing that I take away from these stories.
Chag Sameach, everybody.